Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. This is Alan Muserino, Superintendent of Schools for the Albert Unified School District. And this week our special guest is the Commissioner of the CIFSS Southern Section, Mr. Rob Wigod. Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Alan. I really appreciate being invited, and it's great to be with you.
Well, I know you're a busy man and you're basically on everybody's plate. Everybody wants a piece of you, I'm sure. So thank you for taking the time to join us. As you know, the governor came out and expressed his interest in getting our economy moving, reopening California, and of course, childcare and getting schools started is a big part of that. So let's go ahead and start things off by listening to the governor's comments during his 4/28 briefing.
That have been broadly defined around the need to address our kids in schools. We clearly have shut down, people well aware of this. The schools are shut down for the remainder of the school year. Learning continues at home, distance learning and the like. But we recognize there's been a learning loss because of this disruption. We're concerned about that learning loss even into the summer. And so we are considering the prospect of an even earlier school year into the fall, as early as late July, early August. And so we're beginning to socialize that. We have made no decisions definitively in that space, but I just want folks to know the concern around learning loss and the concern about waiting till later in the year into the fall for the new school year. As a parent myself, and having talked to many other parents and educators, even the kids, I think we might want to consider getting that school year moved up a little bit. And so that's one of the things that we want to begin to socialize in this indicator. We need to prepare for that. We need to start preparing for the physical changes in the schools and the environmental changes in the schools that are necessary in order to advance that conversation and make it more meaningful, accordingly in the child care space itself. We are able to make these, again, announcements and begin to have a more public conversation with you about opening up with adaptation and with modification meaningful changes to our stay-at-home order, again, because people have taken seriously, overwhelmingly, the stay-at-home orders and physical distancing.
Wow. The first time we've actually had the governor talk about speeding up the school district. I'm not sure exactly, nor have I been able to explore with my colleagues yet exactly what he means or intends when he says start things sooner. But it sounds as though he's saying because there's been so much learning loss, instead of our normal opening date, we should try to get things started a little bit earlier so that we could try to pick up for some of the lost time. What did you make of it?
Well, I think that was a really interesting statement for him to make, but I feel that it's very vague in a lot of ways because all of our school districts have calendars in place for the start of the fall semester. They're different dates throughout a section as large as ours. What the governor is saying, I think, is that in exploring moving some of those dates forward into July, later July, earlier July, I'm not sure, but then also with the caveat of what it would look like. So to bring the students back and then either looking at distancing or smaller classes or staggered times or staggered days, or if there's going to be this wide variety of different deliveries of education, I guess part of me would just say we're all taking our guidance from our health professionals, and I would think the socialization, the ability for school to take on more of a normal environment for students and staff. I'm not sure that opening earlier, but having so many restrictions and different things in place, it's hard to evaluate whether that's going to be successful or not.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to begin as soon as we finish today, trying to get a little more information on exactly what what his intentions were with that comment. Our coaches, our students provided, student athletes provided our coaches some questions, our ADs as well. So I have a bunch of questions we'd love to get
Great.
answers from.
Great.
So let's just go get right into it. I have the pictures up on the screen for everyone to see. If schools open with social distancing and congregation guidelines, do you foresee any fall sports being acceptable, or is it a all or none?
The start of all fall sports is going to be dependent on one thing and one thing only, and that's going to be decisions made by people like you, by our educational leaders who make the decision based on, again, the health professionals and the guidance that you receive that it would be safe to reopen your campuses. Once you've made that decision, then the next decision is going to be under what guidelines or provisions are you going to make, and then the decision about whether it's time to then allow the girls volleyball team to go back in the gym, the water polo team to jump back in the pool, the football team to get back on the field, the girls tennis team to get back on the tennis courts, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're an academics organization first and foremost. Our motto is academics, integrity, and athletics. And so it is about academics. And there won't be anything going on with fall sports or any kind of sports throughout the school year until academically our schools are back on track and are able to do that in a way that they believe it is safe to then resume athletic activities. So again, that will be the process that will start. Academics first. If the schools and school districts and so forth believe it's time to resume the athletic activities, then you will make that decision. And once we get, this is going to be the huge challenge that we will face as a southern section with 563 member schools, how many of our schools need to be back and reinstituting their athletic programs for then us to develop a calendar that would appropriately have fall sports back in, including championships and all the things that we've missed and all the things that we really look forward to getting back.
Right. I agree. I I'm really curious as to whether or not sports would fall under phase 4 or phase 2. Phase 2 being opening schools. It seems to me that not only the congregation of large numbers of fans, particularly for football, but obviously just all the contact that goes on between players during games. It just seems like they're two very, very separate things. So let's for those who may have undervalued education or educators, they definitely will have a new perspective. And I believe of the many silver linings of this crisis, everyone working together, coming together, making decisions in the best interest of our communities, of our state, of our country, is really going to help us in the long run. So thank you for those comments, Rob. Let's
Thank
continue.
you. And I agree with you 100%. And I will also say this real quick about sportsmanship, because I include sportsmanship in that, where I think we really, and I expect and I hope that the emphasis on sportsmanship might be a little bit different when we come back. How important is it when the official makes a bad call when we've been dealing with life and death situations that have taken the opportunities to be part of high school athletics away from us? And maybe we take a little bit of a different approach in sportsmanship, treating our opponents, treating our officials, treating our spectators, treating everybody involved with a little bit more respect and understanding and compassion, because we've missed it. And we shouldn't be in a position when we come back to have the ugliness that can be part of high school athletics become even more of an issue. If anything, I'm hoping that we really see sportsmanship take over too, and compassion and care for others become much more important, that we can reset our priorities a little bit when we get to resume. We're not going to really be able to put athletics back without that confidence restored that it's health and safety first. And it may take a while for that. I certainly hope not, but I'd much rather us be able to do it in a time frame and in an environment where we really feel like we can do it without a tremendous risk involved. And that's why the summer concerns me. And even hearing the governor today, and maybe we will talk about that in a moment or two, but the discussion about summer programs, that discussion a month ago is not the same discussion today. When we first saw schools shutting down and things happening, we're getting a lot of questions on summer programs. Now we're hardly getting any, because people are realizing if we truly want to get fall sports back, then we really have to look long and hard at the summer, because I don't think any of us would trade a 3 or 4 week summer program that actually ramps up cases and the ability for us to then have to shut things down again and take those 3 or 4 weeks or whatever time frame that is to help further protect us and make the fall be even better. I think anyone would make that trade. A summer camp for a week versus the entire season of fall sports. I can't imagine anybody wants to see that. So as I said, as this keeps developing, we're getting less and less questioning about, when summer programs can be resumed. If you ask me on a personal, and this is just me on a personal level, I almost feel like let's just take the summer and realize that that's going to be additional time that we can use to help protect us for the fall. I respect the winter and spring sports enough to say, I'm not so sure you really need a summer program to get ready for winter and spring. If we can keep those on schedule, yes, it impacts our fall, and we'd have to make sure we get enough appropriate time for our fall sports student athletes to be ready to start playing games. But if we had to sacrifice a few weeks of the summer to make that more of a reality, I think we ought to make that trade in a heartbeat.
And you could see where, as a parent, your senior potentially may miss the season, may miss an opportunity for a scholarship, much like our students in the spring. You could see a parent almost sacrificing anything to play if they could play, right? And despite the potential threat, just because it's, a senior year, everything you've worked towards, and a potential, whether it's scholarship or not in the works, just to play and finish things out as you started. So definitely very, very sad for our, particularly our seniors. Find another. Has there been discussion about adjusting the sports calendar? This was one of the questions my coaches and players have come up with.
Yes.
Shortening season so that all sports could still crown a champion. So, for example, would if we were out of the woods by November, would there be a 2-month football season, for example, maybe play over the holidays?
Right. Well, I can share with you that we've had a lot of discussion about this, and I'll give you a couple of ideas of how this could potentially work. So let's just take fall sports, and let's take football. The reason I'm choosing football first is because football has the least amount of flexibility. Girls volleyball, boys water polo, girls tennis, et cetera. Those are sports where you can play multiple contests in 1 week. And there's that allows you some flexibility and some adjusting that you just don't have in a sport like football, where we really wouldn't want to be in a situation where the students would play more than one contest per week. So I would offer you a scenario that, working backward from December 19th, which is the final Saturday before winter break, we've put together a scenario working backward from there, where we would have, for example, a 7-week season. Allow leagues to play their 5 league contests and a couple of games prior to that. Now, we have larger leagues. So if we had an 8-team league out there, then obviously they wouldn't have any preseason games. So there'd be a 7-week season. Now, remember, this would be what I call the last gasp. This would be, if you're trying to fit fall championships in before winter break, let's say, this is how it could potentially play out. We're working backward from December 19, 4 weeks of section playoffs, 7 weeks of contests prior to that. And then this is not absolute, but just as a ballpark, a 4-week prep time where we have 3 full weeks of practice and then a 4th week, which is what we call game week, where they're going to play on that Thursday or Friday night. So 4 weeks, 7 weeks, then you play 4-week section championships. If you work back from December 19th, the first day of practice is September 14th. That would be it. Now, if it would still, it's close, but not quite, well, then it's September 21 and you have 6 games. If you go 1 more week at September 28, you have 5 games. And you'd start on September 28. The larger leagues would have a task of figuring out how to send the playoff entries in. The 6-team leagues could still play their 5 league games, and we could conduct full championships. For the other sports in the fall, December 12th, be the week before that. Again, they have a little bit more flexibility. Their league play can be shortened. It doesn't take 5 weeks to play league play in girls volleyball or girls tennis or boys water polo. They could have shorter league seasons. They could have shorter preseason. So they could potentially start even later. They could start into October and have practice. I don't know if a girls volleyball team needs 4 weeks to practice before they play, or a tennis team. They might be able to get themselves into shape to play in a couple of weeks. So the possibilities exist. But if we get to that point, now if we're in November and these are happening, we have a decision to make on winter sports. Winter sports kick in around the middle of November, right? A couple of weeks before Thanksgiving, 10 days or so. So would winter sports be starting up as well? We're conducting the fall, we've moved it back, and then we start the winter. Or do we say, no, we'll just focus on the fall and we'll push the winter back to January. We can start the winter in January, extend their season a little bit longer. Obviously have to push the spring back a little bit, get them started a little bit later, maybe into March, but then obviously finish it all up by the end of school. So there's a scenario where, yes, you could fit all 3 seasons in, provided you finish the fall, let's say, before winter break. But now let's say we can't. And on April 28th, I would prefer to focus on the fact that with the scenario I just provided for you, that would be the last gasp of fall sports in December. No section, or excuse me, no regional or state championships. And the CIF executive director has been very clear that the state office respects the section championships and will allow the sections additional time to conduct section championships and then leave it there and not have an additional 2 weeks or so of state. So that December 19th date I'm using does not include any regional or state. That would just be section. But let's say we weren't able to do that. So then do we have a discussion about starting fall sports in January? And they go through January, February, and into March. And then winter sports start in the middle of February and go February, March into April. And then do the spring sports start, middle to the end of April and go April, May, and into June to make sure we could fit all 3 seasons in. The one thing I don't see, and in the discussions I've had with others to this point, I don't see, if we can't finish the fall, and let's say we even couldn't start the winter, that we come back in January and we go with football, boys water polo, girls tennis, girls volleyball, cross country for boys and girls, and then include boys and girls basketball, boys and girls soccer, girls and boys wrestling, and girls water polo all at the same time in January. I don't think a school campus could handle that. I don't think it would be good for the students academically. It would be a nightmare for any multiple sports students. So I honestly don't see that scenario where we would somehow push it back. If we had to go to January or February even to somehow start the fall up at that late a time, then we could potentially look at that. I don't think we're looking at it in April right now. We could potentially look at it to try to fit it all into a 5 or 6 month window. But then I'd also say, stats and numbers wouldn't be great if we had students playing 10, 11, 12 football games, January, February, March, and then, a few months later going right back out to a football situation. I'm not sure that's going to be good for them either. So there's a lot to consider, but I think the desire for our coaches and our students and all of us would be to make sure we could get fall, winter, and spring. And we're willing to work through any and all scenarios to try to make that happen. But there will be always coming a time where a decision would have to be made one way or another. And hopefully it would be a decision made that there is a way to get it done. Unfortunately, this last spring, there just wasn't. That window just kept getting smaller and smaller where we had to make that decision. And on April 3rd, there just wasn't going to be enough time. And more than that, it was the schools closing. I mean, that to me was the game changer. When the schools all started shutting down, to me, that was very clear signal that there wasn't going to be an opportunity to keep athletics moving forward without schools. So I know that was a long answer and I apologize for that, but that's really how we see this.
So do you foresee a scenario where there aren't any fans for particularly sports that you can socially distance? I guess you could say in certain sports, depending upon the number of people who are there, you may have a better shot at distancing. But let's say students were tested, so student athletes we knew did not carry COVID, and then you were able to socially distance. It seems as though you'd still be able to conduct quite a few sports, but a sport like football, for example, it would seem as though you wouldn't be able to conduct it only because you have large crowds in most high schools.
That's right. And, you know, girls tennis, could you set up a scenario to play a girls tennis match? You probably could. You could make sure the players don't interact when they switch sides, make sure that the spectators are spaced out and distanced enough. I still wonder though, if you put the girls on a bus and send them somewhere, they're going to be with their own teammates. They're going to certainly not be social distancing, but that to me would already be handled on campus. I mean, if they're in classrooms, then I would assume if it's safe enough for them to be in a classroom together, you could put them.
Is there going to be a COVID response blue book with relaxed eligibility rules and enrollment standards, given COVID-related transfers and all of the movement that could very well occur?
The short answer is yes. The specifics I can't really explain yet because they haven't been decided, but they are being discussed. The reason for the discussion is obvious, and I'm very pleased that we're having it. In fact, we're having another conference call tomorrow with the 10 CIF commissioners, myself included, and our CIF state office folks. And we're continuing to discuss financial issues and transfer issues and things that will, when we're back in business, that will be very important for us to be able to address. The thing that we want to be is responsive to the real scenarios and real situations that we are faced with. And I think we can do that. The timing on that, I think the most important thing that we need to do and consider in these discussions is, when do we get the full range and depth and scope of this crisis? It's at a certain point that it is now. But at what point do we get a sense of just how much, how many, how deep this crisis went before it finally started to turn in the other direction? That will give us a much better idea of how to address the scenarios that are going to present themselves. So I do think that there's some options on the table. I do think that the discussion is going to continue. We've been working, as I told you earlier, we've already been working with the California Department of Education on some education code issues to make sure that any kind of issues and rules are not going to be in violation of the ed code, or if there are going to be ed code provisions made that may address this as well. So there's definitely going to be discussion continuing. And once we get a real sense of how deep this has gone, then, and not to say that we don't realize it's gone deep already, but we're still not there yet. We're still not where we believe it's going to be all completed, so to speak, in terms of this particular time frame, and when things start to reopen, and when there's an ability to know better of where we are as a society, so that we can make sure that we can be responsive to real life needs and real life scenarios. And I want the CIF to be proud of that. I want us to be seen as helpful and responsive, not as people who have their head in the sand and not really realizing and recognizing how much suffering and how much difficulty that our students and their families have had to endure.
Absolutely. With some districts using credit, no credit, pass, fail for spring grades, and some districts like we in Alvord are using traditional letter grade systems still, and then there's even hybrid versions. How do you untangle all of that when it comes to scholastic eligibility, and how are you going to define it and apply it moving forward?
The interesting challenge now, and it's going to be a local school challenge. Schools have always determined and certified their students for academic eligibility. Now that schools, many of them changing to different pass-fail or credit, no credit types of systems, they're going to have to adapt those changes to the CIF bylaws, which state a minimum of 2.0 grade point average and passing a minimum of 20 credits from the most recent regular grading period. So the districts, the schools are going to have to determine what a pass means. Is that a C? Is there an equivalent that we can assign to that pass grade so that we can apply what that equivalent is to the 2.0 grade point average bylaw? Also, the same thing with credit. Are we going to be able to determine how many credits a student is going to receive so that they can meet the standard of minimum 20 credits from the recent regular grading period? But coupled with that, our ongoing discussions that again are part of our work with the other commissioners in the state office. Our schools are allowed to have a probationary period and schools can determine the length of the probationary period. It just cannot be longer than 1 semester. So a school or school district, if they wish to implement a probationary period that is longer than the one they currently have, as long as it doesn't go past 1 semester, or they may, if they haven't adopted a probationary period before, may consider adopting one and instituting it by the fall of 2020. There's a couple of things that local schools can do to try to mitigate students who don't achieve. I think one of the things that we all know is the distance learning option is difficult. It hasn't been available to every single student. It hasn't been something that's been easy for anyone, for our students, for our staff, for anybody. And the last thing that we want to do is harm these students even more. They're suffering enough, and they're missing enough. So for us to be in a situation where we find so many more students who, when we finally are able to resume, become academically ineligible, then we're failing them. And so that continues in terms of discussions on various ways that either at the local level, or if we need to go deeper into the CIF bylaws and constitution, again, working with Ed Code and some others, the education department, then I think that's on the table for discussion, so that when we do come back, I think the last thing we want to see is students dealing with more difficulties than they've already had to deal with.
Without a doubt. And looking through the lens of students is always the best way to make decisions in our business, Rob. The right man for the job, and a big job that it is, heading up the southern section of the CIF. Thank you for the wisdom. Thank you for the candidness. You always get candidness with Rob Wigod. Full disclosure, Rob and I go back a long way. I started my career in Long Beach Unified teaching at Milliken High School. Rob was a student, probably back then at Wilson, but we had ties in Orange County together as well.
That's right.
And my last few stops as a superintendent. So Rob, great respect for you and your work. Keep up the good work, and we'll get you back on the show in a few weeks, month or so, and get caught up with what's happening with the CIF, because this is changing, and who knows what it's going to look like in 3 weeks or a month.
Right, and I think you, Alan, you're right. We have a lot of years together, and I have great respect for you and hold you in high regard. You're the right person to be leading young people and a staff
in the school district, and they're fortunate to have you, and happy to help you any way I can, and we'll stay in touch, and just look forward to, as I said, better days ahead. So anytime you want to discuss what's going on, I'm happy to help, and I'll look forward to that too.
Perfect. Well, we'll see you soon. And I am going to conclude the podcast with that. We usually do our mailroom segment, but we've definitely spent a lot of time talking with Rob, and certainly could probably talk for another couple hours. So signing off on this week's podcast. Again, thanks to our guest, Mr. Rob Wigod, the Commissioner of the CIF Southern Section. Good night, and we'll see you next week.